everyone to today's conversation, Trump, Biden, or climate change, who will win? The final whistle on the US election is yet to be blown, but at this hour, 2 days after the US elections, we know that Biden has an edge over Trump. When it is about environment and when it's about climate change, anybody replacing Trump is very good news. But how good is this good news? Will Biden, who throughout the election portrayed himself as a centrist, be able to deliver on his promise to decarbonize the US economy? Will US be able to meaningfully and with ambition rejoin the Paris Agreement? I am Arnab Pratim Dutta. I am an associate editor with Down to Earth, and I'll be moderating this conversation today. Joining me today are three experts from the Center for Science and Environment's climate change team. We have Samrat Sen Gupta, who heads the climate change team in CSA. Samrat has over 20 years of experience dealing with cross-sectoral linkages between climate change and renewable energy. Our second panelist is Shazneen Gazdar. Shazneen is a conservationist and an ecologist and has worked on climate change policy across 7 countries. The third panelist on our list is Avantika Goswami, who has been working on mitigation in climate politics and economics for the last 7 years. Her last assignment was with the Earth Institute in New York. Let me again welcome everyone to this conversation. Can I begin with you, Shazneen, first? Do you kind of breathe a sigh of relief given that the scales have tilted towards the Democrats, towards Joe Biden? And although we still do not have a result, but he is possibly inching towards a win. How important do you think this win is going to be in terms of reversing the damage done by Trump in the last 4 years?
Hi, Arnab. Thank you everyone for being here today. And I'm very happy to be here with my panelists and colleagues at Center for Science and Environment. So I, as someone who has been practicing environmental management and climate policy for the last 14 years, I'm absolutely delighted that the scales are tilting in the favor of Joe Biden. I mean, it is at this point, everybody who's here and anyone who reads the newspaper or switches on the TV has at some point come across the phrase that Joe Biden is not the best, but he's not Trump, and therefore is a winner already. So that is how it is in the climate realm also. So actually, Joe Biden comes from a history of working very progressively in the environment realm and climate fight. As early as 2008, when he was still Senator of Delaware, he actually acknowledged the historical emissions of the United States and said that US has to lead the charge on climate change, and even before that in 1986, he was involved in passing some legislation. I mean, it never passed, but he was involved in getting it up to the Senate. So Joe Biden is clearly more passionate about the environment and climate change than Trump is. So to put it mildly, he's got a huge task ahead of him. The work that Trump has done to stop all progress where the fight for climate change is concerned for the last 4 years in the United States has been tremendous. I mean, we will talk later on about how the US, the states, the cities, and organizations have been fighting back and been doing their bit. But at a country level, at the federal level, Trump has been very, very destructive. He's rolled back more than 150, 160 environmental regulations because he believes that environment regulations come in the way of creation of jobs. And it's absolutely not true. My colleagues will talk about that later on in the conversation, Plus, he has very famously pulled out of the Paris Accord, the Paris Agreement. So the Paris Agreement, for those who don't know, is part of the UN's Framework Convention on Climate Change. It's like the current treaty. The Paris Agreement is from 2015, and a number of countries, most of the countries, have signed up to this agreement. And the United States also famously signed up during Obama's time. And of course, anything Obama has done, Trump doesn't like. So he's stepped out of it. In fact, he initiated the process of leaving the Paris Agreement as soon as he joined the US, as soon as he became the president of the United States. That has led to a number of actions that have had to be taken. So the two major contributions of the US from the Paris Agreement would have been, because it is not, because they left it yesterday, officially, ironically, the day after the elections. So the US is out of the Paris Agreement. Is that they were supposed to contribute 3 trillion to the Green Climate Fund, and which is supposed to fund all the activities towards achieving the nationally determined targets, the nationally determined contributions, the NDCs. So the US had also decided as part of the global community that they will cut their GHG emissions by 26 to 28% at the time of joining the Paris Agreement, as part of that agreement and as part of that agenda. But because Trump got the US out of the Paris Agreement, that is not manifested, that has not happened. So while all this was going on, now to catch up. So 4 years ago, 2015, in fact, this was the situation in 2016. But now in 2020, the expectations from the United States are a lot more than they were 4 years ago. 4 years ago, the expectations were like, these two things, contribute the money and here are your targets. But now countries have rolled ahead. They have charged full steam ahead since 2018, in fact, when the net zero targets were announced. So when the net zero concept was announced in the IPCC's 1.5 degree report. And very quickly, I just want to say what the net zero emissions are and the net zero plans are. So it's basically net zero is when your emissions, that your greenhouse gas emissions are balanced by absorbing an equivalent amount of emissions from the atmosphere. So basically, as a country, you decide that this is it, we are not going to emit more than this. And that is balanced out by capturing excess CO2 emissions from the atmosphere. Because as you know, that is the whole reason for global warming. So this was as part of the 1.5 degree goal, which is like to limit global warming to the limit of 1.5 degrees. And so the idea is for global carbon emissions to reach net zero by mid-century. And for that, they have to fall by 40% towards 2030. So now the United States not only has to catch up to its nationally determined contributions, NDCs, but also ideally come up with their own net zero targets. So 126 countries from around the world have identified net zero ambitions. Some of them have put it into legislation. The EU has signed up with their net zero plans. Japan, South Korea, even China has come up with a net zero ambition up to 2060. They plan to peak their carbon emissions by 2030 and bring it down consequently towards net zero by 2060. So the US has to really, really catch up. Joe Biden has a plan, so I'm very grateful for that.
Can I stop you here and put the next question to Vandika, which is basically a follow-up question to what you have said about the whole net zero plan. Vandika, Biden too has a plan to tackle climate change, and he's been talking about decarbonizing the US economy. What do you think about this plan, and do you think it is ambitious enough?
Yeah, sure. So thank you for that question, and thank you everybody else for joining this conversation today. So yes, so first of all, we rejoice in the fact that Joe Biden has a climate plan compared to his opponent who does not. So the first iteration of Biden's plan, released in 2019, accounted for, I think, some $1.7 trillion of investments into achieving 100% clean energy and net zero emissions by 2050, as well as a number of other provisions. So reinstating fuel efficiency regulations, planning for various methods to absorb carbon, such as carbon capture and storage, rejoining the Paris Agreement, as well as to stop issuing permits for new oil and gas drilling on federal lands. This 1.7 trillion iteration of the plan was completely insufficient. Just for a comparison, the coronavirus stimulus that was passed this year by the United States was priced at $2.2 trillion itself. So when you consider in comparison, the horizon of climate change as a crisis and the size of it and the impacts that are to come, 1.7 trillion was meager at best. He then invited ideas. He received a fair amount of pressure from activists from the more progressive wing of the Democratic Party. And as a result, he was pushed to revise his plan and make it more aggressive. One sort of, I guess, catalyst for this was when Bernie Sanders he ended his presidential campaign and endorsed Joe Biden. They formed this task force called the Biden-Sanders Unity Task Force, which included people like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and comments were also invited from a lot of young climate activists, groups like the Sunrise Movement, who have been very vocal and very sort of strong supporters of ideas like the Green New Deal. So the revised iteration of the plan calls for $2 trillion now of spending on climate-friendly infrastructure. It also calls for the achievement of 100% clean electricity by 2035, in addition to the earlier goal of net zero by 2050. So honestly, so we'll talk about the positives first. If Joe Biden wins this election and is able to advance the kind of climate policies that he is looking to advance, one analysis, and I'm quoting an analyst from Carbon Brief here, more than 3/5 of the carbon dioxide emissions of the world will then be under net zero targets, which is a broad proclamation, but symbolically it could mean something. On the other hand, in comparison to other climate plans that were released during this presidential run, Bernie Sanders released a $16.3 trillion climate plan, which pushed for far-reaching changes, deep decarbonization of multiple sectors of the economy. Kamala Harris, who is currently Joe Biden's running mate as vice president, she had her own presidential run, and during her campaign, she released a $10 trillion climate plan. So as you can see, there are much more ambitious proposals out there, which speak to the kind of urgency that's required and the kind of transformative climate action that is required at the moment in order to stay within the IPCC's 1.5-degree target. But again, we come back to which is the lesser of the two evils, and Joe Biden has a plan. So we're at least mildly optimistic about that.
Yeah.
So, Shazni, do you think you can add to that?
Yeah. So basically, like everybody knows, and someone posed the question, that the United States actually left the Paris Agreement yesterday. It is true, ironically, a day after the elections. Now, what comes next? So if Joe Biden comes in as the interim president, the earliest that he can rejoin the Paris Agreement, and he has in fact vowed to rejoin it. He said it's the first thing he's going to do when he was out, campaigning, is to rejoin the Paris Agreement. The earliest that can happen is in January, because that is when the president-elect gets sworn in as the next president of the United States. And that process basically starts with him writing a letter to the UN Secretary General, and requesting to rejoin and taking it through to the US government structure. That process itself is supposed to take about a month. So hopefully, if everything runs smoothly, Joe Biden comes in and is able to rejoin the Paris Agreement. That will take about a month. Now, what that means is that the United States would have to come back with hopefully more ambitious CDC targets. And Joe Biden, as Avantika mentioned, has a net zero plan, which hopefully he can put into action almost immediately. But what is really required from him as the leader of the free world, let's just call this spade a spade, is to really push forward and create a strong agenda towards COP26, which is the next iteration of the UNFCCC meet, the global meet that happens where everyone gets behind a plan, all the movers and shakers of the climate world get behind a plan. So that's going to happen later on into 2021, and it's going to happen in Glasgow. And the United States needs to be a very strong leader over there and bring, because the US has this fabulous ability to bring together the globe on a consensus, And when the United States left the Paris Agreement, it sent a very strong message that the US is no longer part of the international consensus on climate change, climate science, and the fight to stop dangerous climate change below 1.5. So that is literally what he's going to have to do immediately.
Yeah, but also the issue is Avantika and Shazneen, both of you, right? Whoever wants to take the lead on the whole issue of fracking. Now, fracking and shale gas has become the biggest bane on climate change today, providing cheap energy and cheap, dirty energy to the US and also to other countries across the world. So, Biden has never actually gone ahead and said that he's going to ban fracking, has he? He hasn't. So, Avantika, how do you think this is going to play out? He has a climate plan. I mean, I think they call it the Green New Deal or something like that, right? And how green is this Green New Deal, right? Considering that you still have fracking as the main way of getting, power energy into your country.
Yeah, sure. Happy to talk about that. So, just one kind of thing I'm going to highlight here is that the Green New Deal is a separate resolution, and Joe Biden's climate plan is separate. So, when Joe Biden talks about net zero by 2050, in order to read between the lines, it's important for us to think about how are we really going to achieve it. He definitely has, generous provisions for natural gas as a part of the energy mix, as well as methods like carbon capture and storage, which are at this point still fairly contentious in terms of the opinion that climate advocates have of those methods. So Biden has been very consistent, in fact, that he is not going to ban fracking. He's not going to impose a nationwide ban on fracking. So during the during the Democratic nomination process, there were a number of other candidates. So Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris both. Kamala Harris slightly late in the game, but eventually she joined a number of other candidates. Elizabeth Warren as well. They all agreed on the fact they would impose a nationwide ban on fracking if they won the presidency. Biden has pretty much stood his ground. For that, I think we need to go back a little bit during the Obama era. So in the mid 2000s is when the shale oil boom really took place in the United States due to certain techniques that were discovered. So it's a combination of hydraulic fracturing, which is fracking, and horizontal drilling. When they were applied together, vast reserves of shale gas in the United States became commercially viable for use. And as a result, from being an importer of oil and gas, the US has now become, I think, the world's largest producer of oil and gas, and is also at this point exporting oil and oil products, related products as well. A lot of this boom was overseen by the Obama administration, and Biden was right there alongside, supporting that entire endeavor. He's traveled to countries like Ukraine to promote US shale gas in opposition to, obviously, Russian gas, as those geopolitics tend to play out. He has, at this point, said he's not going to impose a ban on fracking. I would say broadly for two reasons. The first is he wants to appeal to a number of voters who are in states where fracking provides a certain number of jobs. Many of those are rural voters. A second reason that he cites is that he views natural gas as a bridge fuel, a fuel that, now that the coal industry in the US is completely on the decline. So in an effort to move completely to low carbon energy, While wind and solar sources, which are completely carbon-free, are ramping up and developing, and technologies like energy storage are also, reaching sort of a more commercial stage. He believes that natural gas can help in assisting that transition. So he uses that argument to say that at this point, fracking will continue. He tries to make some minor concessions. So he says that he's going to impose regulations on methane emissions from the entire fracking supply chain, which is a huge problem. He has also said repeatedly that he wants to ban fracking on federal lands, but that's honestly something that you can pick apart in a second. Currently, only 11% of fracking in the United States takes place on federal lands. The rest of it takes place on private or state land, which the federal government doesn't really have jurisdiction over. So that's honestly not saying much. But yeah, he is continuing in his spirit of continuing a lot of the Obama era status quo. He is an advocate of this all of the above energy mix, in which natural gas plays a pretty prominent role. And to be honest, for the climate movement, that's not great news. In addition to having a number of problems associated with fracking, the process of fracking itself, the amount of water used, the kind of chemicals that are used that pose a risk to drinking water sources, the fact that wherever fracking has taken place, adjacent locations have found, farmers in adjacent locations have found that crop yields and quality have been impacted negatively as a result of fracking. And of course, most of all, because of the methane emissions that are associated with the entire natural gas supply chain. Methane as a greenhouse gas has a much higher global warming potential than carbon dioxide. And methane emissions for the world on the whole have been on the rise over the past couple of decades. And there haven't been a ton of studies right now done attributing a lot of that to shale gas from the United States, but we are inching towards that consensus that the US definitely probably has a role to play in currently rising methane emissions due to its dependence on shale gas.
Can I stop you here, Vadika, and actually pass on the mic to Samrat? Samrat, let's get a little deeper into this fracking business. This fracking business is not just a problem in the sense it's what do you call, it's a fossil fuel, but it's also very cheap, right? And that could change the entire energy market, not just in the US, but also globally. So do you think fracking and shale gas will become the biggest hurdle for the US and the world to meet its commitments?
Uh, Good afternoon, everyone. Hi, Arnab. Thanks for the question. Yeah. Yes, you are correct. And maybe it's not for the US, for the world, because shale gas, though US presently it's extracting, it is in usage, and the usage is increasing exponentially. There are a lot of other reserves are in various parts of the world, which may create problem, and like China, like Argentina. But yes, fracking and use of shale gas for US is more of energy security point of view. It is giving cheap power to their industry, which they can argue that it makes them competitive. And yes, they are now exporting the petroleum product, and one of the beneficiary in that in India. India is importing a lot of uh, gas and petroleum from US. It has started from 2014-15 and it is increasing. So if we talk about how the fracking will impact the climate change, yes, there will be impact, and there will be no shortcut solution. We cannot immediately address, or US cannot immediately address, to completely wipe out the use of shale gas. It is definitely a much lesser polluting than their coal power, but due to the cheaper economics, it also triggering consumption. That is also a point of worry. But still in 2000, from last 5 years, we have seen that US emission has gone down by around 12, 13 or 13 odd percentage. Most of it can be attributed to the to the shale gas. Uh, Considering that, though Biden has not said directly banning fracking, or he has given a small concession that he is going to ban it only on the federal rank, but he has a plan to push the renewable energy sector. And if we see from the domestic audience perspective of US, renewable energy is providing a lot of job support in US. And we are talking in a scenario when last April, US has seen the maximum number of unemployment or percentage of unemployed population in last 60 years of history. And though it is slowly covering up, where renewable energy, as per IRENA, it is having a 850,000 odd numbers of direct employment, and total uh, supply chain, the total indirect and direct employment more than 3 million. So that's quite a number, and it is almost double plus than the number of people that employed into the conventional energy sector. So that will definitely going to add on to Joe Biden's arms if he really likes to put renewable energy, and that will help the sector to develop both for US, as well as it will create a depolarization of the concentration of manufacturing of various renewable energy product, as well as it will help countries like India in getting entrepreneurship, investment, and technology supply. That will help.
But Samrat, just a follow-up question to that. It also seems that renewables have been slowing down in the past couple of years in the US, right? And that's happened because of shale gas, right?
It is, you cannot say it is slowing down. The growth rate, what it should have happened, that has got affected. And but if though the result is not out, if we get Biden in, and if he is going to follow what his agenda or election agenda talking about, definitely this sector will get a push.
Yeah, Samrat, also, can you expand a little bit about the whole consumption factor, right? Because of shale gas. Is that leading to more cars on the street? Because the transportation sector has become the
Yeah.
most emission intense sector in the US.
Uh, Historically, the transport fuel is a very politically contentious product in US. So definitely, when the cheap supply of shale gas in the market, one point it has reduced the cost of the fuel, but on the other hand, it has increased the consumption. And particularly, we have seen that last few years, where the power sector, who was the largest emitter, their portion of emission has gone down, and suddenly transport sector has taken over, because the policies towards mass transportation has not been taken up, and people were indirectly encouraged through the economics to take on private transportation. That is creating the problem, and it will be the problem because common people, the definitely a long-term futuristic environment agenda doesn't make their day-to-day decision. Their day-to-day decision depends on the finance.
Yeah, so if I could just add to that a
Yeah.
little bit. So basically, with Trump in power for the last 4 years, so whatever progress that would have been made has been made at the initiative of the states and of the cities and of the citizens themselves in the United States at this point. It hasn't really been helped by central or federal level policy or guidelines, So transportation, like Samrat said, has risen as the biggest emitter of GHGs in the United States. And for that to be really controlled and curtailed and pushed in a more constructive direction, federal support will be required. You know? So actually, Biden also promises to strengthen auto emission standards, which is something that Obama had started, and then Trump, of course, put to a halt. And now, if Biden comes in as the next president of the United States, he will take it up again, among other regulations. Yeah, just wanted to add that.
Yeah. Just one, also a little addition to what Samrat was mentioning, in particular due to low gas as well as oil prices, air travel has increased exponentially in the United States and is forecast to continue increasing. There's going to be a bit of a blip, obviously, due to the COVID situation, but it's going to pick up. And that has been one of the major drivers of transport emissions in the US increasing as well.
Yeah, I think that's a fair argument. Avantika, can we just go back and look at Biden's running partner, Kamala Harris, right? She has been seen or has been portrayed as somebody who fights or wants to fight climate change. And during the campaign, once she was chosen as the vice presidential candidate, she kind of changed her stand on shale gas. Okay? So how do you see her coming out once Biden takes over as the president of the US?
Yeah, honestly, I'm curious about that as well because Kamala Harris, she definitely has an interesting history and an interesting voting record, as well as so she's held a couple of fairly substantial roles in U.S. government. So she was initially the district attorney for San Francisco, after which she was the attorney general for California till 2017, I believe. And then most recently, she was the United States Senator from California. She has had kind of a string of inconsistencies in the positions that she has held. I think broadly, it's safe to say that she has her progressive moments, but she's leaning more moderate in her politics, definitely closer to Biden than, say, to an Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez or a Bernie Sanders. She does have a record of at least expressing concern for environmental justice. She's done work during her time in San Francisco on addressing pollution issues that affected marginalized and low-income communities. During her time as Attorney General, she did pay attention to holding polluters accountable and did pursue certain cases against polluters in the state of California. However, on the issue of fracking, she, throughout her years as Attorney General, when fracking was being expanded in the state of California, I don't believe she expressed any major objection. During her presidential run, she kind of, I think flip-flop is a word that we use quite a lot in association with Kamala Harris. I think eventually, when she saw a lot of pressure coming her way, she did say she would support a ban on fracking late in the game. However, now that she is Joe Biden's running partner, recently during the vice presidential debate, Mike Pence accused her and Joe Biden of wanting to kill jobs, kill the economy, banning fracking. And she came out and said, she was very clear. I think I have a quote here somewhere. Never mind. Basically, she said that Joe Biden will not ban fracking, and this is the truth, and the American people need to know and whatnot. So she's obviously made some concessions and is supporting his position at this point. On some of the more progressive sort of ideas that she has endorsed, she did endorse the Green New Deal, which was a resolution introduced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In the climate plan that she launched during her own presidential campaign, She had goals like achieving a net zero carbon economy by 2045, ending fossil fuel subsidies, holding polluters accountable. One really interesting aspect of her climate plan back then during her presidential run, which I hope is revisited in some form if Biden wins and if she has sufficient influence. She talked about organizing an international coalition of countries that would then discuss a managed decline of fossil fuel production, sort of in like a multilateral cooperative way, and envision a proper roadmap towards completely zero carbon energy. And that was a very minute point in her climate plan, but I hadn't heard of something like that in any other candidates' climate plans. So there were some great ideas coming out of her campaign. At this point, if I were to kind of attempt to forecast anything, I do see her as shifting back towards the center, supporting Biden on his stances. She does, however, have good relations with the more progressive wing of the party, like Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. So together, she and Ocasio-Cortez introduced this act called the Climate Equity Act, which was focused on evaluating the impact of various legislations on frontline communities, climate legislations on frontline communities. So she's shown instances of support. So one hopes that she can bring in that sort of flavor in her role as vice president.
Thank you, Avantika. Let me just get back again to Samrat. Samrat, basically, the US elections will also have some kind of an impact or effect on the global renewable energy, proliferation of renewable energy globally. So, how do you see the way ahead? What's going to happen if Biden wins this election?
Uh, on the agenda, yes, he is going to support the renewable energy propagation in the country. That's good. But it requires a lot of support in terms of finance within India, US also. And there is a question mark how progressive Biden will be in designing the tax scenario within the country to support the subsidy really directed to the renewable energy, which is at this moment dominated by fossil fuel subsidy. Second point, uh, without considering any major leapfrog development in US, still the sector is quite well developed. And if it get a little bit extra push, it will be really for their internal audience, the job creation part, the green energy or emission reduction, but also will create a huge export oriented business for the other major market around the world. Particularly India can be one of the beneficiary of that. And also it will help in creating assets in terms of their investment coming out in different major market, as well as their entrepreneurial skill. So it is a positive, overall positive per se. Now how much exponential growth will be there, that's a matter of Biden's progressive steps, actual progressive steps he will be taking in due course.
Samrat, can you be a little bit more specific about how will India be affected? India's solar plans, India's solar mission?
Um, the solar mission or Indian solar plan affect, it will be all positive in the present scenario if we consider Biden is coming into power. There will be definitely a push, and the present supply chain insecurity the country is going on, particularly in meeting the solar target, what we have taken. There will be some kind of respite in that, because another supply side opportunity will create. Um, overall it will be all positive.
We also have a few questions from the participants who've joined the webinar today. The first question is from Bhaskar Tripathi. Shazni, if you don't mind answering this question, the question is: other than immediately implementing an ambitious plan for climate action to chase net zero within the country, what can US offer to the developing and underdeveloped countries in terms of technology? This is Bhaskar, who is the principal correspondent of IndiaSpend.com.
Right. Yeah, thanks, Bhaskar, for that question. So basically, India did the developing nation, all developing nations. So literally, the momentum of the global community has been moving towards greener tech. That is something quite obvious when you look at the statistics. The uptake can definitely be improved upon, and what is required right now is whether Biden comes in or Trump comes in, is for India Inc. and India as a country and the developing, literally the global south, all developing nations to create that infrastructure that is required to accommodate such technology. So to create infrastructure and frameworks that recognize the economic opportunity that a green recovery and clean energy momentum would create. So we need to step up basically as a country. So right now, post-corona recovery, we've seen a lot of the post-corona recovery money go towards really fossil fuel-based and dirty coal-based technology, which already exists. Basically, we are taking what we have and we're just giving it a breath of life to revive the economy. But at this time, we could really look at this entire phase as a time to invest in new capacity, in new technology, which is something the United States and other developing countries have actually pledged to contribute to as part of their various climate actions and activities that have just basically been part of protocol. So there is clearly movement there, but if the United States was to rejoin the Paris Agreement, there would be again clear momentum, and there would be clear initiative driven from there. So that is interesting. Yeah.
Shazni, there's another question for you, and this is from an anonymous attendee who says, do you think the net zero is a compromised approach diluting the commitments and targets? So basically, this person is asking if the net zero commitments go along with the NDCs.
Right. So actually, the net zero commitments are more ambitious than the NDCs. So the NDCs, at least Indian NDCs, and if you look at NDCs around the world, let's just stick with the United States. Primary, the forefront, the NDC that was right at the right front and center was to reduce GHG emissions by 26 to 88 to 28%. In a certain space of time, but the net zero, the whole concept is to take your greenhouse gas emissions to zero, which is a lot more ambitious than 26 to 28%. So, and along the way, there are markers, there are benchmarks, there are breaks. And this is also the momentum of 126 countries right now, so it's just over 60-something% of the planet has signed up to the net zero targets. And so therefore, it is absolutely not a compromise. It is in fact a step up. And many of these countries are taking their net zero targets, again, sticking with the example of the United States. Of course, they have scrapped it under Trump, but initially it was set for as a benchmark of 2005, which is a lot more ambitious than the benchmark of 1990 that was set with a lot of previous targets. So the moving forward, the net zero emissions basically towards 2050 are not a compromise. That's a great way forward. We can definitely be more ambitious, like why 2050? Let's bring it down sooner. If there are countries, like of course, these are very small countries like Bhutan and Suriname that have achieved their net zero targets already. And there are other countries of the world, like the small island developed states, the SIDS, They are actually in a lot of trouble because of climate change and sea level rise. By 2050, we don't know if a horrible event would happen, and they might not have access to their lands again. So let's work on these net zero targets. Let's get more ambitious. Now, India, for example, doesn't have a net zero target. India, in fact, has so far said they don't want a more ambitious nationally determined contribution. So we should, in fact, push our own countrymen, our own government to have more ambitious NDCs and have the courage to set net. We can do it. It's clear. It's obvious. Like the way we are moving forward.
Yeah,
So,
thanks, Shazneen.
yeah.
The next question is for you, Samrat. This is basically it's by somebody called Samir Vaz. Can
Yeah.
India look forward for any improvement in carbon market in the near future in case Joe Biden comes to power?
Hi, Samir. Hope you are doing well. I know you. So, US election or its result doesn't have a direct impact on the carbon market or revival of the carbon market. The carbon market, what we used to address is the Kyoto Protocol driven CDM market. But there will be carbon market, but the mechanism will be completely different. There will be monitoring and verification. Everything will be same, but it will be based on the Article 6. And it will be more going away from a corporation to corporation activity rather than a country to country, and the detailed modalities of that is yet to be fixed, and that the discussion we are very much interested to look forward.
I think Samrat, there's another question heading your way. This is basically about, or if any of the panelists want to take it on, right? This is about a discussion on taxing fossil fuels to promote renewable energy. And this is from Ramesh Deshpande in the US.
Yeah.
And they're asking for your comments on this issue.
Traditionally around the globe, fossil fuel got the maximum level of subsidies in terms of internalization of the various other costs associated with the fossil fuel extraction and usage in their economic evaluation. So if we consider that to be the baseline of discussion, I don't think there will be immediate or very quick answer to that anywhere, it is in US or in India. But yes, slowly we are seeing that the various subsidies are getting at the fossil fuel sector, that is slowly shifting towards promoting renewable energy. Like in India, we have coal cess, and that's supposed to be used for renewable energy promotion. It has not been properly used. That is the implementation part, but at the policy level, it was designed like that. So the shift is happening, but it is very slow, and it should be picked up unless we will be not meeting our target.
I think we have the last question for the day. And Vandika, if you will be kind enough to take this. This is from Clarence Maloney. She says that it looks like Democrats might not win the Senate. Can we speculate how much this will hinder Biden's plans, especially if the Senate leadership continues?
Yeah, I think the last that we checked earlier today, the Republicans were, I think, at maybe
48.
48, right? And they need like 51 to win the Senate, which is likely to happen. And this has happened in the past during previous Democratic administrations when there's been a Republican Senate in play. To be very honest, it's not going to make things easy for Biden pushing anything through the Senate. A Republican Senate is going to definitely be a challenge. For example, on the issue of the Paris Agreement, while Biden has very vocally talked about rejoining the agreement on day one of his presidency, and then it's going to take 30 days and so on, any meaningful policy push he wants to make for the Paris Agreement, any commitments he wants to make on behalf of the US will have to go through the Senate. And that it definitely will be an uphill task. Similarly, in the past, when the Green New Deal resolution was introduced, it was immediately blocked. And of course, there's multiple techniques like the filibuster that can be used to delay any kind of meaningful policy measure from being passed. So it would definitely make things slow down the kind of progress that Biden would be expecting to take on many of these issues.
Right. I said it was the last question, but actually we have two more. And the first one, Samrat, if you can handle this one. This is basically about nuclear energy, and Trump and Biden seem to agree on increasing the amount of research to be done on nuclear energy. Although it's clean, it has a lot of issues, right? So, what do you think? What is your opinion on this? And this is from Indranuj Pathak.
Samrat, you're on mute.
Saying as an environmentalist working on climate change issues and other environmental aspects, definitely this is not the answer I or anybody in this world like to hear about. This technology has, this world has seen a lot of devastating accidents with this technology, and particularly the problem with nuclear waste. So definitely it's a no-go point for an environmentalist like us.
And the last question, Shazdin, if you would like to pick it up. This is about Trump's re-election, which seems to be a distant possibility right now. But will it affect employment in sustainable and environmental sectors in the US?
Trump's re-election,
Trump's
not Biden's.
re-election.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so actually, if you look at the statistics, currently there are about 3 million jobs in the renewable energy sector in the US alone. And of course, Biden wants it to take it to 10 million. And Trump's re-election will really, like I said, Biden wants to take it to 10 million. Trump's re-election will definitely slow that process down. You know, he has absolutely no ambitions to raising jobs in the renewable energy sector. He wants to very much keep the status, the oil barons and the fossil fuel giants very in power. He's BFFs with a lot. So Trump's re-election will, to definitely some extent, hamper the number of jobs created in the renewable energy sector, especially since he doesn't support the clean energy and renewable energy sector, But the global momentum anyway is towards renewable energy. He can't stop it, but but he can slow it down, which is precisely what has happened in the last 4 years. But in spite of his efforts to increase jobs in the fossil fuel sector, there has been a decrease of jobs by 5,000 in the coal sector because mining is on the decline. In fact, it was, I think the percent is 18%. Please correct me if I'm wrong. 18% decline from the mining sector. So in spite of his best efforts, there will be jobs created in renewable energy because we can see it all around us, But the momentum that would come with a president who is encouraging of policy and regulations in the renewable energy sector, it'll be unmatched.
Right. I'd like to add to this real quick. So in terms of his stance on fossil fuels, particularly in his pro-fracking messages, Trump has talked completely about the jobs that are going to be lost. So an interesting case study here is Pennsylvania, which is a very critical swing state in the elections. And we're hoping that, Biden manages to win it. But again, it could really go either way. In terms of the state of Pennsylvania itself, jobs in the fracking sector have shrunk by 7% since 2017. And currently, they represent only a small fraction of the state's overall employment. A recent poll has also shown that most Pennsylvanians support electricity from renewable energy, and currently clean energy jobs employ twice as many workers in Pennsylvania than they do in the fossil fuel industry. These are figures from 2019. So honestly, it's the economics of fossil fuels. I mean, we're not even talking about coal. It's even the economics of fossil fuel jobs like oil and natural gas jobs, which just can't compete with renewable energy. So as Shazneen said, I think the momentum is going to continue regardless of whatever subsidies Trump tries to push in, whatever support he tries to give the fossil fuel industry.
Right. Thanks, Avantika. Any last words, Samrat, about the whole energy sector, Biden and climate change, US and climate change?
Um, Overall, the energy sector, particularly the renewable energy sector, is definitely going to be benefited. The best part, the renewable energy sector is creating more job per unit of investment that will help job creation, and that will address both the US as well as India's agenda and the overall world's agenda to create job and create more employment for the, and it also address to the CO2 mitigation, CO2 emission mitigation. Ultimately, it will help everybody to achieve their NDCs or net zero target. Yes, there are technological challenges that all these renewable energy technologies are too variable, so it creates a lot of grid instability that helps in development of energy storage. That's a new sector, and it will be the next decades will be mostly the technological development will happen in the energy storage. Though we are presently concentrating on battery, there may be other technologies. Hydrogen will come in as one of the fuel option for the transportation sector, particularly long distance and public transportation. Though and personal transportation may depend on mostly on battery storage. So this overall leapfrog development on the technological side will definitely get a push with if ultimately Biden comes into the picture. Now, how much the push will be, that is definitely based on his capability of implementing the agenda he's talking about. Yeah.
Right. Thank you so much for joining us today. I mean, the results of the US elections, I mean, we
Sorry.
still don't know about them, and how the new presidency will behave. I mean, it's the same. Therefore, I mean, all we can now think about is basically to keep our hopes alive and keep fighting for climate justice. Thank you. I'm grateful to everyone, the panelists, the audience, for joining us. Thank you once again for joining us.
Thank you, Arnab,
Thank you,
for
Arnab.
hosting us.
Thank you, Arnab. Thank you, everyone.